My name is Duane Wells, and I have lived in this place since 1960. I'm a native Californian, born in Hollywood, as a matter of fact. Never lived there, but we lived in the Los Angeles Basin in Temple City till grammar school was over, and we moved to Balboa, Newport Beach, for high school and 1 year of junior college. I rented boats, worked at boat rental, and taught sailing and things of this nature when I lived in Balboa. And I went hiking with a friend of mine who lived 2 doors down, and we climbed Mount San Gorgonio several times with Mount San Jacinto, and then we walked around the desert camping and things of this nature. And I decided I didn't want to sit in an office for any length of time, so I looked around, decided forestry might be the example that I didn't mind, because a lot of times we were in national forests. My counselor at Orange Coast, and he recommended Oregon State University. Well, it was college at the time, Oregon State College, and I asked him why. Berkeley's a lot closer, and it's a state college, you know. I think you'll find that Oregon State has a little better curriculum and everything, teachers, professors, things of this nature up there. And I did go to Oregon State, and I found out one of the things that makes it better right off the bat is they had at the time 3,000 acres of forest land within a half hour, 15, 20 minutes actually, a drive from Corvallis. And we spent one heck of a lot of time out in there actually doing the work that we learned in class. It was our lab, in other words. We didn't have to go clear over the Sierras for the whole year or summer without getting paid. We did have to have 9 months of practical experience before we could graduate, so that's three summer vacations, you know, between classes. And the first year, I roomed with a guy that was in forestry, and his father and his uncle owned a logging company, show, and we in Susanville. So he got me a job setting chokers over there. So that was the first job in forestry I had, was setting chokers out of Susanville. The second year was in Pickering Lumber Company at Skull Creek Camp. And I went there because it was better. They had a railroad, and they had to do the full paper layouts for railroads and things of that nature. So I got quite a bit of experience there because my major in forestry was forest engineering. I had been drafted into the Army, and between my junior and senior years, and I got tired of fighting the draft board, so I said, okay, let's go to war, you know. Excuse me, this was when the Korean War was going on. And thankfully, after I went to basic training in Fort Ord down here, I got sent to Germany. I didn't go to Korea. And of course, I went over there as, I don't know, you know, MOS is. It's the category that light infantry, for example, is an MOS. Heavy artillery is an MOS. Construction engineering is an MOS, different ones. So they got everybody's numbered down to what they're good for. And I was light infantry, which means I could shoot a bazooka, and that was it, or a rifle and pistol and stuff like that. So I talked my way out of that when I got to Germany, that the guy could see he had everything in front of him, that I had 3 years of college in forest engineering. So he said, "You sure you know what you're doing?" I said, "Well, yeah, it's what I've been going to school for." So he opened his book. Well, what natural entity, what natural thing seeks its own altitude, seeks its own elevation? I sit there and thought, well, water does. A lake goes up and down, seeks its own elevation. Oh, okay, you must know what you're doing. So he changed my MOS and sent me off to Topographic Engineer Company in Stuttgart, Germany, where I spent the first 3 or 4 months profiling the Danube River, starting from where it went into the Russian zone of Germany and into Austria, down to Passau. We went all the way up, going across it, below and above every bridge, below every dam on the river, the Danube River, and till we could walk across it. Why are we doing this? The sergeant says, well, if we have to come back into Germany again, we're not going to know where to put these pontoon bridges without having to tinker with it anymore and go around finding them. So, sounds reasonable to me. So after that, we got doing what they call picture points, putting coordinates on bridges, dams, and everything else around the American zone. And actually, we went down into the French zone and did some in the Black Forest, but it was just second-order accuracy, which was hundredths of a meter for the Air Force. So when they drop a bomb, they'd know the coordinates of that river or that bridge or that dam or what have you. Second-order accuracy is pretty doggone accurate, And we were out of the range of firing, about 40 acres of our firing range in southern Germany. And this Air Force major came up and asked if we'd be willing to put coordinates on a spot out in the middle of that 40 acres. To second-order accuracy. Oh, yeah, we'd do that. So we got the coordinates started and ran the line to... we put a big X, on ground and put second-order accuracy into it. And I said, Major, do you, PFC sitting there, Major, what do you need second-order accuracy for? He says, oh, well, if you're going to be around in next week sometime, I will take you out here and show you if you want to. And I said, well, sure, I got the sergeant to say, well, I want to go too. So the whole squad went out there to the platoon is what it was, to the spot that we did. And we got on this little knoll that was probably 800 or 900 yards away from that X, And where are these guys coming from? Well, they're coming from B-52s coming from Egypt. Are you sure we're far enough back? Oh, you just wait and see, Well, all right, if you say so. But we were on this little knoll, and he said, he was listening to them over the radio, talking back and forth. And he says, okay, the first one's on the run now. Okay, the first bomb is away. So we sat there, and we sat there, and sat there. And pretty soon, whammo, it landed out there. And what was it, about whatever is in a squadron? The whole squadron came from Egypt. And whatever's in a squadron, I can't tell you, 8 or 9, 10 airplanes. The farthest one away was 50 yards. If you can believe that. And they were at 50,000 feet. You know what I mean? Whatever they want to say now, I believe, And we never heard them. We never saw them because they let the bombs go about 10, 15 miles before we got there, and the whole bomb would come down, that arc. For them to do that sounded ridiculous to me. They didn't have any lasers or anything at that time to figure out where that thing was going. Beautiful, man. I believed him after that. Air Force, you're doing a good job, you know. No, the thing that actually I got tired of is that Willamette Valley is wet in the summertime, you know. And I just decided when I got out of that school I did not want to work in Oregon. So I made sure I worked in California, and the only thing that was on the bulletin board at the time from California happened to be from the Mendocino County Assessors Office. So in 1956, I came down here and went to work. That was the first job permanently out of school. But the summer before that, I had worked for the Pacific Coast Company, which was based in Willits, 25 miles north of here at the time. But I worked for them out of Leggett, which is, you know, almost 90 miles north of here. Lived in Garberville and went to work with Fred Green, who, by the way, passed away about 3 weeks ago. So that was a shock. It was nice to know he was older than I am, or was. But anyway, I met my wife there in Garberville, married her, and we moved down here. Went to school, I went here, came here, went to work April Fool's Day of 1956. It was that long ago. I was hired as a timber appraiser, and there was another guy hired as a timber appraiser from Oregon State, and a guy that was the chief of timber appraiser. And he was pulled from the Bureau of Land Management around here because they have forests too, you know, and he had a little more experience out in the field than everybody else did, so he's the chief of the thing. And when I got down here, it surprised me, but assessors in the old days relied heavily upon what their predecessors put on the tax roll, which was amazing to me because property taxes are based on property values at the time, current property values, not 10-year-old values or something of that nature. And it came to Webb Brown was the guy's name, and came to his attention that people were getting away with an awful lot. All classes of property, not just timber owners, but so he hired 2 or 3 more guys, and the timber appraisers, an ag guy, an agricultural guy, and he had a commercial property appraiser, industrial property appraisers, and things of this nature. And I got here and I found out that what was on the tax roll, the volume of timber, was actually about a 1929 value, or volume, I should say. And they had a flat value for redwood. What was it? $5 a thousand, I think, and $1.20 a thousand for Douglas fir and everything else that was on the tax roll, which was about $50 too low to begin with, much less having a current value or volume on the roll. So what we were expected to do was go through the county and put some volume on the current volume on the tax roll. I and this other guy, timber appraiser, didn't spend a lot of time on industrial land because the chief appraiser, timber appraiser, was taking care of that because he knew doggone good and well they had timber cruises, and so we wouldn't have to go around tinkering with the timber cruises, things of this nature. But the farmers didn't know exactly how much they had on their property and things of this nature, and the small landowners didn't for sure. But I started in the North Half because that's where I had been working. I knew the country up there fairly well. The other guy started in the Sonoma County line, worked north, and the Humboldt, Trinity County line worked south.
So you were out by yourself?
Oh, yeah. I'd leave Monday and come home Fridays most of the time. And I'd just gotten married, and, you know, my wife really loved that, you know. But anyway, we lived through it. This timber, all the timber had never been on the tax roll. The ones that was on the tax roll were the industrial owners, the farmers, ranchers out there. They were never on the tax roll because they had nobody to go out there and figure out how much there was. And I know that they did it back in the old days with contract appraisal, and I'll lay you odds those guys stood on a ridge and said, "This is what this for is." That's the way it looked to me when I compared that 40 to what's on the ground. It's the aerial photography even, you know. It was a pain. But we not only got the timber that was growing there and taxable, but we had to make an estimate of when it was logged, where it was logged, make an estimate of when it was logged. Because this Section 12 3/4, Article 13 of the California Constitution says that anything, when you cut any timber, or 30% of the volume in timber, the remaining timber is exempt, and the timber growing is exempt for at least 30 years. So we had to have a guess, an estimate about when it was logged, so that when 30 years showed up, we could put it back on the tax roll. You had to convene a maturity board at the time, which consisted of a representative from the Board of Equalization, a representative from the Board of Forestry, and the assessor of the county that timber was in. That was expensive because we had a lot of cutover land, and of course the industry knew when they logged it, but some of these farmers weren't exactly the people that logged the trees when we came by, and didn't know exactly when the stuff was logged, so we had to figure that one out and put it down so when 30 years came around we can convene the maturity board if it was indeed mature. And this whole process, as far as timber is concerned, costs an awful lot of money for the assessor's office to administer, because it's kind of hard. You just don't get out of the pickup or the Jeep that we had and walk up around 40 acres and looking at the timber. You might get 140 a day or something like that, and it'd take an awful long time to come up with the volume, so we had to do a lot of estimating, I'll put it that way, and that cost money. It's an interesting job because it's diversified, you know, really. You appraise the same kind of property, but you're in the redwoods once, and the pines sometime, and the straight Douglas fir sometime,
Yeah.
and then the power pole timber, you know. Well, as I said before, Webb Brown was a farmer, and he could see that a lot of these upland rangelands were being divided. Ranches were being divided and sold off, or home sites, or just 40 acres for the people that lived in the city. And he saw that this is not going to be helpful to farming, what it amounted to. So he and somebody else thought about it long enough and decided that they ought to go get something that would encourage farming instead of property taxes. Tax on property that would be more reasonable as, you know, the benefit of growing something there, which would mean lower taxes. But in effort to get it equal, the property owner then would get lower taxes, but he guaranteed that property would stay in agriculture too. And there's a penalty for him to get out of agriculture. And so he took about, actually he had to convince a lot of these county assessors to do this too, you know, because we're a little closer to the Bay Area, and a lot of them are, and the things were getting divided around here in the late well, the early 60s, actually, in late 60s, and they thought maybe we were going to have a problem if they didn't get going on something, you know. So he and a couple of economists devised a agricultural preserve, is what it amounted to. Williamson Act, Land Conservation Act, whatever you want to call it, but that was a proposition wherein the landowner could sign a contract with the county that he would retain his property in agriculture for a renewing period of 10 years. So at the end of that first year, that year would be added on to the end of the beginning of the doggone thing, so you'd always have 9 years looking at you in the face. And you couldn't do anything else with it but grow trees, or grow agricultural, intensive agriculture, or sheep and cows, or something of that nature. So however, the property taxes, according to Article 1, Section 1, Article 13 of the California Constitution, says it'll all be appraised at full cash value. And except that's exempt by law or the Constitution. Like public property, you can't send a tax bill to them. But so it applied to all private property, and if you know too much, a little bit about appraising, there's three approaches to value: the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach. Of which the income approach usually comes up with the lowest value, but it's still an appraisal. Well, they use a cap rate, based on the market, and so that they get pretty close together, those three approaches. The order in which I gave it is usually the highest replacement is cost approach, less normal depreciation. The income, the market approach is what everybody else sold their property for, and the income approach applies to commercial property, including ranches and things of this nature, wherein you capitalize the income to determine the market value. Well, he got them to legislate a cap rate that was 6%. The higher the cap rate, the less the market value is, obviously. So they got 6% legislated in there. Well, that is a pretty good stimulation for a farmer to keep his land growing what he wants to do anyway. The only, and also that thing, to get out of that thing was, let's see, how the Sam Hill does it work. I can't even remember that now. It was a percent. Oh, I remember. It was the difference between the current market value and the ag reserve value that's on the tax roll times the caps rate. And the ag reserve value was something like $50 an acre. Well, that difference is $50 an acre times the number of years you've been in the ag reserve. It adds up. So if you've been in renewing and everything, if you've been in for 10 to 15 years, you can say it's going to be 15 times that difference. So it's a real good incentive to stay in the ag reserve. And I got to tell you, that is the best thing. If you don't like subdivisions on hill land, people don't have to worry about it in ag preserve property, because it's they have already decided it's going to be in agriculture, and they're already paying us less taxes. But the only way a county can get them out of there is stop this automatic renewal, so you'd have 9, 8, 7, 6, and your property taxes go up to the market value, and you discount it for 9 years, 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, something like that, only going backwards, going up to the high number. It took Webb Brown about 2 or 3 years to get that done, because you had to change the Constitution too, because it said full cash value, and this one's not full cash value. So they had to wait till the next election came around, and a primary it was, and put that on there. And they emphasized that it were going to save these grounds for agriculture. They better do it when the Board of Equalization is establishing the value. That is the main thing, because it's in the law after that, and they can go to the local Board of Equalization, Board of Supervisors sitting as a local Board of Equalization and protest, but if they didn't protest to begin with, they've lost their ability to protest before the local Board of Equalization. So it's just like law, If you don't go to the lower court, you can't appeal and go up the ladder that way, and this is the same thing that's happened. It became very easy. In fact, I was one of 4 people that got to go to Washington to see how they administered their yield tax laws up there, and 2 people from the legislature's administrative office and the assessor of Sonoma County. And Webb was going to go, but his wife took sick, so I went up there in his place, and 4 days up there, and we learned a lot, what we didn't want to do, things of this nature. Because they had that equalization tax entity up there had to go around and classify all the timberlands in Washington, in the state of Washington. And we had soil maps. All counties had soil maps. Not very accurate, but good enough for government work, you know what I mean? As Arnold Schwarzenegger would say. Yeah, the Ag Preserve certainly protected farmers. There's no question about that. And the only problem with it, in the same way with timberland, when it went into TPZ, the zoning then for timberland production zone, in other words, was the same. It was based on the income to value, and the value was established by the Board of Equalization too. So when a farmer gets around to the point where he wants to sell his property, the person that buys it better want to get into agriculture. And they better want to get into timberland production, because getting out of that ag preserve and getting out of the timberland production zone is very expensive. And I have, let's see, the last example that I know of was there was some acreage down here by Hopland, near where Fetzer Winery is down there, that sold as a vineyard for what was it, $80,000 an acre or something of that nature. Whereas the income approach by the Ag Reserve put it at some place around $20,000 an acre. So you take that $60,000 an acre and multiply it by the number of years that sucker was in Ag Reserve, and you got a hell of a penalty, more than they paid for the property itself, to get out of the doggone thing. So nobody buys it. Now, if a farmer is unhappy with that, well, he's the one that got into the Ag Reserve. But some of them are unhappy about it. And I think some people might be happy with, not happy with timberland production zone either, because the same thing is happening there. In fact, that penalty is a little bit worse than ag preserves. So. But the people, and I'm sure that the environmental community doesn't understand that, but knowing that, people don't come around and buy this agricultural land or the timber land to grow houses on it, because they can't afford it. There's no house in the world that's worth the amount of money that they'd have to pay to get out of that thing to begin with. Now you can, in ag preserve, you can stop the automatic renewal of that thing, but you still got 9 years in the ag preserve until it runs out. And then the board of the planning commission has to rezone it to something else. And the same thing would have been true in timberland. But every year that thing goes up to the current market value, whatever that is. Now I'm told that somebody over in Anderson Valley paid $180,000 an acre for some vines, timberland there, for a vineyard over there. And that's just about Napa Valley values, So it's getting to be ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. I'm with $2 Chuck. There isn't a bottle of wine that's worth any more than $2. So that's me, not the people that do it, but anybody that's coming in here looking to make a use of the property other than for agriculture got a surprise if they don't understand. Well, I might continue with what Webb was doing. After that, he took on timber, not in an ag preserve, but we put timber in ag preserves in this county. But there's got to be a better way. We still had to go out and administer all of this thing, so he decided it might be good to have a timber yield tax on it rather than ad valorem tax on the doggone thing. And he really had a hard time getting that across because you see, you got to go over there and you not only have to get the Board of Equalization, Board of Forestry, to go along with the concept. The Board of Forestry didn't care. The Board of Equalization cared because it was a loss of money is what it amounts to. Excuse me. But not only that, he had to get all of these lobbyists that represented these various and sundry industries. Farm Bureau, California, at the time, I can't even remember the guy's name now, but the forestry industry representatives and things of this nature to go along with it. And they agreed to go along with it because it was, we agreed to whatever the yield tax rate was in Oregon and Washington, we'd use too. A yield tax is the value of the timber on the stump at the time of logging. And the value on the stump is compiled and proposed by the Board of Equalization, State Board of Equalization. They have a timber tax division in there now that does nothing but that. And they go around, find out the market value is of trees, and we hold a hearing on it and once a year, and so that that year is this is what the volume, or this is what the value per 1,000 board feet is going to be. And the assessor doesn't have to do a heck of a lot, All he's got to do is know how much redwood is on this parcel, how much Doug fir, how much the species are, and then where it is and what area it is, what's the soil classification it is, and apply that particular value. And that's all in the computer. All you got to do is change those values. The soil isn't going to change, It's just one of those things. I had to appraise the Union Lumber Company sawmill and the Masonite sawmill, and things of that nature. Man, that was over my head, until I figured it out that I'm going to have to contact the people that made these machines, the head rigs and And masonite, it's those big presses they had out there. They only made in one place. So I had to call them to find out, and they didn't want to answer me. You know, first of all, it was a tax assessor that was asking. And second of all, it's none of your business. You know, they lived in Mississippi or someplace like that, and they had this thing up there. I just had to actually end up going to their books and finding out what it cost them back when they put them in, and try to do some appreciation and depreciation, things of that nature. It was a learning curve for me, I'll tell you. But it wasn't out in the woods. Boy, not any more than him. That man was the smartest man I've ever talked to, and he was dignified, unlike me. You know, he didn't raise his voice to anybody or anything. So, no, I think he was the smartest man I ever met. He taught me one heck of a lot in the, almost 35 years I worked for him. They were logging, and they were logging like there was no future in logging, actually. As everybody was coming back from World War II and wanted the houses and things of this nature around, and they were in here supplying the wood for them. And there wasn't much question. The guy I worked for up in the Pacific Coast Company, Fred Green, he and I both said, you know, we're not this. They're hauling logs, dragging logs right down the middle of this little gulch here, and you know what happens when that happens? You're going to get water in the bottom of it in the wintertime, and it might take a little of that soil downstream, you know, things of that nature. But that's the way it was done in those days. No, I liked it all. I liked it all, especially when I'm out there by itself. You know, you were out there, and actually you begin to wonder about it after I was in the assessor's office for about 20 years, I guess, or 15 years. I had to spend more time in the office because I was the chief appraiser. I had all the property in the county underneath my appraisal, my value determinations. Too much to know it. And so I didn't get out as much as I did at the time. In fact, I started spending much time in Sacramento as Webb Brown did. You know, it's just one of those things. The job required it. You can't say anybody over there really knew what they were doing. That's what it amounts to, in my opinion. I mean, the timber appraisers over there knew what the heck they were doing, but you try to tell that to the hierarchy, it becomes a problem. No, when I first got here, the chief of timber appraiser said, you know, I've been down here at the local airport learning how to fly on the GI Bill, you know. I said, oh, yeah? I got some of that left over. And so I went down here to learn how to fly. 1956 I started. 1959 I got my private license. About mid-60s I got my commercial, and then late 60s my instrument ticket. Got enough hours to be able to fly around the county for the fire patrol, co-op fire patrol. Now that was interesting, although you're up at 7,000 feet just going around, it's kind of boring, but if you find a fire, you got to work it at that time. Nowadays, the guy goes out and finds a fire, and they got an airco that comes and takes over for him. But that isn't as much fun, because it was fun watching it was the logistics that really interested me. All of a sudden, you'd hear on the radio some oddball call sign because it was somebody from Reading or somebody from south of San Francisco coming out to a campaign fire. But the co-op is the major landowners, or anybody else who's got timberland that's not major, if they want to get into an extra insurance of finding a fire, that they can join that for the number of acres they want to subscribe to the co-op. And when I started out, it was a penny an acre. And so the big companies are really the only ones that we had in there, but you got 800,000 acres. Well, there's 80 grand you got to produce. And let's see, there's 2.25 million acres in Mendocino County. There's about 180,000 acres of timberland. So there's a lot of that small owners, So you could get enough dough. Now I guess it's up. I can't remember now. I don't think I ever got found out, but I think it's around a nickel an acre, something of that nature. But you don't get the CDF guy sitting next to you anymore with all those radios he's got installed in the airplane. And the guy now is in Willits, and all he does is patrol. And when we run out of money, he runs out of flying time. But anyway, it was an interesting thing to me because I found 2 houses out there that nobody reported that were there, and I told the guy to go out. And one guy was out east of Cole. How'd you find me? How'd you know I was out here? Usually they were growing pot out there, but at the time, we had the same problem with pot growers as they do now. But it was a real unknown to us back then, exactly how we were going to get treated. Fact is, we started keeping the appraisers that did that in that kind of country out of the woods, and use the aerial photography, because it wasn't necessary to go out there. We've been over the property before, and the mountains don't change, the soils don't change. The only thing that changes is that you got a different crop out there, and we can take care of that from the office. Flying is said to be hours and hours of boredom for the most part, and that's commercial pilots, airline pilots, and interspersed by moments of sheer terror, and essentially that's what it amounts to. I have flown from here. During '64 flood was one of the things that was interesting. When it cleared up enough, the people that owned the Northwestern Pacific Railroad knew that between Willits and, say, the Trinity County line up there, the railroad looked like hell, and it did. So I took them up there. I took 2 trips. And I got to tell you, I have never seen a railroad in such bad shape in all my life. There must have been 1/4 of a mile. The rails were hooked at one end and a big swing, and there must have been 1/4 of a mile between those things that they had to fix. As a result, they had a lot of tunnels up there that they just daylighted. They didn't mess with them anymore, because there were rocks all over the place. And I've been on the job when a fat tanker went into the ground up by Branscombe. Nobody was talking on. That's the silentest I have ever heard CDF's radios be. He was just too low to the ground. And the lead pilot was always the first one on the scene, would circle the guy sitting next to me to tell them where they wanted it to drop. And, come down that ridge. Can you do that? 10-4. And he'd come down the ridge and pretty high. This guy would come next, and he must have been 100 feet or 200 feet lower or something of that nature. But I can't tell you exactly why crashed up there in Branscombe, except for the fact that he was coming down off of Cotto. That's the mountain between Laytonville and the ocean up there, the 4,000 footer. And that's where the fire was. And he was coming down on the side of it. A little turn, little bank. And something must have happened, because before he got there, he just jettisoned the whole load. And when you do that, you got something wrong with the engine someplace. So, nobody ever figured out what was wrong. Even the FAA coming up couldn't really figure out what he was doing that was wrong. But during that 64 flood time, I flew a guy, a couple people that wanted to get it. Oh, we were flying constantly, getting people to Covelo because you couldn't drive to Covelo anymore, and Garberville and any place else you couldn't drive to up north of here. And I took some people north to Eureka, and I was under the layer. The layer was probably about 3,000 feet or something of that nature, while it was not the best flying conditions in the world, because you were below the tops of the mountains. But as long as it stayed at 3,000 feet, I was happy as hell, But there was a beach bonanza in front of me, down below me too. And he went up there and he got about to leg it and turned around and went back. And the other report said from Rio Dale on that it was clear, the sun was shining, so. And it didn't look that bad to me. And knowing the topography, because I've been flying for 20 years, knowing the topography and where the bends in the Eel River were, and at 2,000 feet, you got plenty of room. You can always go up through it. So, but he couldn't do that, I guess. But you got down to Rio Dale, and man, the sun started shining. It was good visibility and everything else. Coming back, I wasn't going to go that way. I picked up another guy to haul him back. And I said, I'm going down the coast. So we were about 1,000 feet off the water, and I went all the way down, and I listening to guys coming across from Sonoma County over to Bodega Bay Country and then going into the airports around there. Oh, well, we can do that. And we got down there, and there wasn't any way over that cotton-picking mountain. And with a paying passenger, I couldn't go IFR legally, So I went up, didn't go up through it. I said, man, we are going to go over and land at Sea Ranch and spend the night. And we did. And the cook had a birthday that night, and we were invited to his birthday party because we were the only one there. And we had a hell of a good time. This guy that I brought back was the head of the local Louisiana Pacific. In other words, he was Bill Smith's boss. And brought him back. And he never had such a good time in his life, I don't think. Once, after, only about a year or two after I got my commercial pilot's license, and he was down here in Cloverdale, and I went down to pick him up and fly him back up to Eureka, I think it was. I was going in a 172. He got in the airplane with his little dog, and we went boring down the end of the taxiway, and he said, "Let me out. I got to get out of here. This dog got to go poop." So I stopped, turned the engine off, let him and the dog out. The dog went and pooped. Thank you, Harry. I appreciate that, But he carried that little dog around him. We got back in the airplane and went back up to
That's funny.
Eureka. When you're appraising, you get to go out in all these places. I mean, the residential appraisers don't. Commercial appraisers don't. And the intensive ag guys don't. So they're rangeland appraisers And the timber appraisers used to be able to go in places that, if they cared to. I didn't have to go to these corners.
Yeah.
And after I started out going to this one on the southeast, I wish the heck I hadn't started out. It's quite a ways from the Irish Road to get down to where that is. And thank goodness somebody had run section lines in there, and they cut a brush line through it too. So with the aerial photography and the quad map, you could find it pretty easily, because it is a corner. You know where the county line sign is on 101. That's as far, and in fact it is, I think that's up in Mendocino County of a couple hundred yards, and I know it up on the north because the county line now has been moved and put on that bridge on 101 going across it, when actually it's about maybe a quarter of a mile north. You know. And I was a chairman of the Mendocino Council of Governments for quite a while, and they always had a Caltrans guy, lady, it was, at the time, lady, it came down from Eureka to sit in on it, and she's the one that went to all of the regions' councils of government, you know. Well, the councils of government are the agencies in the county that administer the transportation funds, and apply for them and get them from the Caltrans, Department of Transportation, and things of this nature. And we also have to approve the budget of the Mendocino Transit Authority, any transit thing, it's public money, anytime anybody gets any money like that. It was because the makeup of that board is one council member from each council, city council in this county, and 2 supervisors, and one that was elected countywide, and that was me. Somebody figured out that the tax collector and the treasurer and the auditor controller don't get out of that office. And I didn't mind being in there. I clamped down on him a couple of times just because, you know, what are you guys doing? In fact, I tried clamping down on this transit authority business. Man, I gotta tell you, I hate these vacant buses that drive around, the big buses with 5 people on them, you know, things of this nature. Well, if we don't get it, they'll just go to San Francisco. Well, San Francisco, can you? That's a problem with you. Think smaller, think smaller. To me, you'd be prepared not to really make too dang much money. You know, it's not something like if you're working for industry or you're working for a private individual. You can get a raise here and there when you earn it and things of that nature, and maybe even enough to buy some of this stuff yourself. But especially in the assessor's office, if you buy something, it better not be a conflict of interest, you know, because you're appraising that property to begin with, the thing for a property tax basis. And so you have to think long and hard about even buying the property when you're in the assessor's office anyway. Not for any other department of the county government, but one of my engineering professors at Oregon State said, if you want to go to work in forestry, get in the Cascades or the Sierra Nevadas. Do not get into the Coast Range. It isn't very high, but boy, is it steep. And he's right. It's up and downhill. And the other end of it, the erosion is quite a bit easier to come by in this Coast Range out here than it is in the Sierra Nevadas. Well, I joined it when I was a student at Oregon State, and I just continued it on. My involvement was kind of minimal, but it really did me one thing, being that I could get grandfathered into being a registered professional of foresters, and one of the criteria was I belonged to the Society of American Foresters, you know, a industry-wide organization that they paid attention to and put it into the law that way. So, no, I was happy with that one. And but my involvement in it was mostly, I was a chair, I think it was 2 years, come to think about it, of the Red Coast chapter over here. And I really worked my butt off to get speakers that would pull them in. And I thought I did a pretty good job, but I wasn't going to do this forever, you know, just to be. And the next guy after that didn't work as hard to get speakers. Well, maybe they didn't know anybody like I might have known them to drag them in there, drag the speaker in there to get the population of the meeting increased. Kept going until very few people showed up, and it was getting harder and harder to keep them coming. And that was after the CLFA was in existence, obviously. They didn't think that American Foresters did well for the public grounds, you know, Forest Service and things of that nature, but they had a real problem with it as far as the private industry was concerned. And we over here had more private industry people that wanted to go. We had a little CDF population that went, and most of them were in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa. Our district is Sonoma and Mendocino and Lake County, but they just didn't see any purpose in being, you know, affected them personally. Boy, you know, I thought about that, and I don't know. You know, you've got to have something that interests the locals. And when you're in Washington, D.C., it's kind of hard to figure that one out, you know. Now you got the Northern California, and I guess they're together now, Northern and Southern California. But you get them all together, and they can be shown, people can be shown that there is something of benefit to them. But, you know, for a guy just starting out, that's a pretty decent dues, you know, to have to pay. And they really got to see the benefit of it. If we could get more human resources departments to put a requirement belonging to the Society of American Foresters in there, you know, and even in private industry to do that, you'd probably get a lot of people into it, but you can't tell them, this, you know, private industry to do that. So. People, you know, and individuals are good, but people are no damn good. Let's face it. You got to have more houses, you got to have more everything, you know, and therefore you take up more land. But they're trying to push into this ag land until they find out that it's in an ag preserve, and then they quit really fast. I can remember being on a planning commission committee, city planning commission meeting committee to redo the general plan, but this was clear back in 1965, see. And the freeway was just starting to put things together and moving, so you know, as far as I was concerned, the off-ramps and the on-ramps are dead. You know, let them go to whatever they want, a few acres on either side of it. So. Well, that's why there's only a few acres on the other side of Perkins that's commercial. You know what I mean? The rest of it's in an ag preserve. And you're not going to find it change any. I don't think, unless somebody's dumb. And there are those. Well, I think the way the timber industry is doing it now is a pretty good way to do things in this country anyway. I look at you go up to British Columbia, and man, I've never seen that much clear-cut area in one spot in all my life. But they get in and plant it, you know. But I can see where an environmentalist might not like it, you know. But the Crown owns all that ground up there, and they can dang well do what they want to, I guess. And but down here, this combination of all types of harvesting works pretty good, I think. The only thing I don't like is these guys selling it to the state of California, and there's a park, you know, and then they do that, there's a gate that goes up, and you can't get out on it because the government owns it now, you know. And that whole Big River area down there on 7,000 acres, where the biggest second growth we got in the country is down there, you know. Site 1 timberland, and trees bigger than that in diameter. Beautiful country.